Hello, called Stockholm here, and in this video I want to share my thoughts on the current endgame crisis in Total War Warhammer 3 and discuss how I would change it to create a more immersive and engaging experience. Warhammer 3 offers a solid foundation for an amazing experience with its customization options. However, one aspect that leaves the game feeling somewhat hollow is the lack of difficulty, particularly in the endgame. The current customizable endgame crisis doesn't contribute to a fulfilling experience. In fact, it breaks immersion by simply spawning fully decked out armies out of thin air. Warhammer 2 handled this aspect much better, by allowing the AI to grow its empire alongside a player, resulting in an equal and engaging rival to face. It's perplexing that this approach wasn't as well received, as it added thematic depth to the game. To address this issue, I propose implementing endgame crisis that gradually grows in scale and pose a greater threat over time. Rather than instantly spawning 90 armies that rush the player, the crisis would develop organically. I have ideas for 3 different crises that aim to provide a more immersive and engaging experience. To ensure a cohesive and tailored experience, the crisis you face will depend on the race you are playing. For example, if you are playing as a Chaos Alliance race, you would encounter a neutral or order faction endgame crisis. Similarly, if you are playing as an order faction, you would face a chaos or neutral endgame crisis. Finally, if you are playing as a neutral faction, you would experience all 3 crises. The trigger for activating the endgame crisis would be based on the territory you occupy and the strength of your forces. The higher the difficulty you choose, the sooner the crisis would spawn, increasing the challenge. This approach would aim to create a more immersive and dynamic endgame experience, where the crises gradually evolve into significant threats rather than appearing abruptly. By integrating these changes, players would have a more engaging and thematic journey towards the game's climax. For the Chaos Crisis, my vision is to have 5 different Chaos portals scattered across the map, each aligned with a specific god, 4 for each Chaos god and 1 for Undivided. When the crisis is triggered, all Chaos Warrior and Demon factions would have their lords teleported to the respective portals and given armies that best represent their alignment and status as Demon or Mortal. For example, Scarbrand would receive a Demon army, while Valkia would receive a Mortal army. Each Chaos God would grant their aligned armies special gifts to aid them in battle. Nurgle could gain increased health and melee defense, Slanesh could get speed and melee attack, Khorne could get weapon strength and armor, Tzeentch barrier and missile strength, and Undivided would receive ward save. The territories these factions held up till this point would be transformed into Chaos Rifts. From these rifts, appropriate armies would spawn periodically. All of the legendary lords involved in the crisis should have significant auto-resolve bonuses against other AI factions. And if they are ever defeated by the AI or the player, they would respawn at the main portal after several turns. However, the primary goal of the Chaos Forces wouldn't be to directly attack the player. Instead, their focus would be on opposing Chaos Gods. So for example, Slanesh aligned armies would target Khorne, while the Tzeentch aligned armies would target Nurgle. Only Undivided forces would actively move towards the player, eliminating other factions along the way. The Chaos Forces wouldn't be able to occupy territories. Instead, they would raise them and create Chaos Rifts that periodically spawn low-tier demon armies. This would prevent settlements in the province from being occupied until the rift is closed. Your main objective as the player would be to reach and close the main Chaos portals before the map becomes overrun with the demon armies and the situation becomes overwhelming. Each main portal closure should be a unique and a challenging experience, resembling survival battles rather than generic encounters. Closing a portal could offer tempting rewards, such as gaining the same buffs as Chaos Gods aligned with that portal, only with some drawbacks, for example, corruption in your entire territory. And choosing opposing gods' boons could result in some additional negatives. Some even bigger drawbacks. Imagine you take the gift of Zinch and then you take the gift of Nurgle. And Zinch basically triggers a failsafe and all of your units become chaos spawn of Zinch. And that'd be pretty funny. It's important to note that the Chaos Forces themselves would also be vying for control of the portals. So if an opposing Chaos faction manages to reach another god's portal first, they will get the associated bonuses and witness the destruction of their opposition. For example, if Khorne Forces reach the Slanesh portal, they would close it and gain Slanesh speed and melee buffs. Now that's pretty much it for the Chaos Crisis. Now for the Order Crisis, my concept involves the major Order factions forming a unified alliance. Since players did not wish for there to be just one faction that encompasses all the legendary lords, but instead want multitude of smaller factions, then why not have all those factions create a united front? And they would get massive bonuses for each faction in the alliance. So here's some examples. Each dwarf faction in the alliance would provide a certain amount of armor and melee defense bonuses. Each empire faction weapon strength leadership, High Elves missile strength, Winds of Magic mastery, Kislev ward save, Cathay extended range, or something along those lines. And the primary goal of this alliance would be to eradicate the player. Every faction would send constant wave after wave of armies to attack you. Each capital city of the participating factions, or rather of the participating races, would become a stronghold where you would fight another survival battle. And once you fight each capital battle, the race whose capital you destroyed would basically fall apart, losing access to the alliance buffs and being isolated. To overcome this crisis, you would need to either eliminate each faction one by one or win the decisive battle at their race capital. Winning the battles at the capital would result in all factions from that race being isolated from the alliance, making them easier targets. Additionally, each capital battle won should grant a unique bonus to your faction, similar how Norsca gains unique technologies for capturing different race capitals. This Order Crisis would create a tense and challenging endgame experience where you must face a unified front of major Order factions. By strategically defeating their armies and capturing their capital cities, you can weaken the alliance and gain valuable advantages for your own faction. And lastly, for the neutral crisis, I envision a vastly improved implementation of the war. Currently, the war feels underwhelming, with fewer armies than other endgame crises, and not to mention that they are vastly easier to deal with than other races. To address this, I propose a more overwhelming and relentless green tide. In my envisioning, the biggest war would spawn armies that have wars already in them, making them numerous and formidable. They would be capable of bringing 60 units onto the battlefield instantly, or a minimum of 40 units if you do not control large armies. And the aim being to create a sense of being engulfed by the green tide, where no matter how many greenskins you defeat, more will keep on coming. But rather than these armies just being late game doom stacks, they should consist of a mix of low and high tier units, similar to the randomness of wars in the game currently. The variation in unit composition would make each encounter with the greenskins unique and feel less painful and more enjoyable. To make the crisis even more threatening, the greenskin factions would receive initial cheats at the start of the campaign, allowing them to rapidly expand across the map. When the endgame triggers, all territories they conquered turn into ruins, spawning 2 to 3 additional armies for the greenskins. Furthermore, for each new territory they raise, they would spawn more armies. Legendary lords would have high tier armies, each being a force tailored to their character, along with 2 additional war armies. These legendary lords would remain behind the advancing force of greenskin armies. So to overcome this crisis, the player would need to either hold their position against the unyielding green tide and prevent further territory loss, or venture into the heart of the greenskin horde and defeat their leaders. Each greenskin faction should receive unique buffs to reflect their strengths. For example, Grimgrover's faction could gain armor and armor piece in weapon damage. Skarsnik's faction might receive stock and speed, Grom's regeneration and mass, Wurzag's ward save, and Azag's, well, his units might become undead and able to regenerate as well. If the player manages to overcome the greenskin crisis, they would get access to the defeated faction's bonuses. Additionally, the greenskins themselves would battle, vying for supremacy and to inherit the defeated faction's buffs. I mean, just imagine delaying any of these crises. It would be a nightmare to deal with in the later parts of the campaign, but if you manage to deal with them early, you can get some neat bonuses to your campaign. Now, is any of this feasible, or am I just asking for too much? I don't really know. I only know that any crisis that gives you more agency and theme, and is not just 90 armies appearing out of thin air, will be better than what we have now. But these are just my thoughts on what could be. What do you think? Is this feasible or not? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more of my opinions on how I would change the game, subscribe for future content. Thank you for watching and bye.